COP28 is approaching from November 29th. Developing countries were pushing developed countries to agree on the establishment of an operationalization of loss and damage fund. What do you inform us to the audience at this stage that who has agreed so far to pay into that climate loss and damage fund?
The situation is way beyond denying whether we are facing climate change or not, or what are the causes, because science is absolutely clear that it's the burning of fossil fuels over the last 150 years since the industrialization began, and as we are continuing to do so, is the primary cause of the climate crisis. Countries and corporations who are most responsible for causing the climate crisis, they have to pay now for the consequences that people are facing who have no role in causing this crisis. Developed countries have to take a lead in providing support to developing countries such as Pakistan, so that people who suffer as they lose their farms and homes, their income, infrastructure is lost, that support should help them recover from these impacts. Developing countries wanted a fund to be operationalized quickly, and that's why they agreed, but they agreed with a set of conditions. And as you very rightly asked, these conditions are about providing access to all countries, but also communities. And that is a demand that as civil society we had put forth last year, that this fund should be able to help communities directly.
Hello everyone, this is Maryam Shabbir and you are watching New Wave Global. COP28 is approaching, and it will be after a week actually from November 29th, and it will hopefully end on December 12th. Last COP was kind of longest one so far because developing countries were pushing developed countries to agree on the establishment of an operationalization of loss and damage fund. And they kind of agreed that there would be a transitional committee actually that will work on the framework of loss and damage fund and who is going to pay into it, where that would be based, and how that would work. So there's lots of meetings and progress going on with relevant stakeholders and the people who are involved in it. And one of the very prominent person who has been involved throughout this process from years is Harjeet Singh, who is also head global political strategy at Climate Action Network International. He's also global engagement director at Fossil Treaty, and he has worked a lot of work around climate-induced migration, among other topics in climate change. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Maryam, for having me.
Harjeet bhai, do you think there are lots of controversies, of course, also going on, and there are lots of climate deniers also very actively, I would say, backed by developed world also. So what do you inform us to the audience at this stage that who has agreed so far to pay into that climate loss and damage fund?
So, Maryam, as we all know, the situation is way beyond denying whether we are facing climate change or not, or what are the causes, because science is absolutely clear that it's the burning of fossil fuels over the last 150 years since the industrialization began, and as we are continuing to do so, is the primary cause of the climate crisis. And when we see impacts all around us, what happened in Pakistan last year, and we have seen after that Libya facing devastation because of floods, and we have seen unprecedented droughts and storms hitting countries not only in the developing world but also now rich countries who at one point thought that they are not going to be as affected as developing countries would be. So climate change is a reality, and countries and corporations who are most responsible for causing the climate crisis, they have to pay now for the consequences that people are facing who have no role in causing this crisis. So that's why right from the beginning, we have been saying it's a matter of justice for us, and developed countries have to take a lead in providing support to developing countries such as Pakistan, so that people who suffer as they lose their farms and homes, their income, infrastructure is lost, that support should help them recover from these impacts.
Definitely. But so far, where is this fund going to be based? There are lots of news stories around it. And do you think that so far the negotiations and meetings you are involved in, you are part of this process throughout? And do you think that vulnerable countries and vulnerable communities would have direct access to this fund?
So, Maryam, as you know, we got a draft decision on the operationalization of the loss and damage fund, which we got agreed last year at COP27 in Sharm El Sheikh. Now, this has been a very intense period. Initially, in the decision, the plan was to organize only 3 transitional committee meetings. Then another one was added. And when the 4th one failed to agree to the recommendations, then the 5th one was held in Abu Dhabi on 3rd and 4th of November. And fortunately, we have reached the agreement. Now, the agreement is not as ambitious as we wanted it to be. And the most problematic part is World Bank becoming the trustee as well as the host of the new fund, because developed countries kept arguing that if we go for an existing institution, then we'll be able to operationalize this fund much faster than creating a new one. But developing countries have been resisting that, knowing the history of the World Bank, not only the way it provides limited access to developing countries, but also the conditionalities it puts and the kind of arm twisting happens behind the scenes. We always wanted an independent standalone institution that can meet the needs of communities and protect their rights, and also to make it fit for purpose. But developed countries kept pushing for the World Bank. And of course, developing countries wanted a fund to be operationalized quickly. And that's why they agreed. But they agreed with a set of conditions. And as you very rightly asked, these conditions are about providing access to all countries, but also communities. And that is a demand that as civil society we had put forth last year, that this fund should be able to help communities directly in cases where they would like to access the fund and lead on the recovery effort. So where we are right now, the decision is that it's going to be housed under World Bank, and which means that the money is going to be with World Bank for dispersing to developing countries. But it's going to happen with conditions, as I said. Now, these conditions are that World Bank has to ensure that it agrees to all the conditions in terms of providing access, in terms of speed, in terms of listening to the loss and damage fund board and not their board, because we know if the World Bank board begins to take a decision on who gets the money, then it's going to be extremely problematic. So it's a mixed bag. It is, as we call, a negotiated agreement. So it is give and take. But the World Bank now has to ensure that those conditions are met. If it fails to do that, then the board can take a decision to find another home for the loss and damage fund. So at COP28, that decision is going to be formalized.
So, Harjeet bhai, there were objections and resistance from developed world throughout these meetings, as we followed in the news. And there was, in the draft, we followed that US wanted that their fund addition or would be voluntary, not mandatory. How do you comment on that?
Well, before I answer that question, Maryam, let's look at the history of US engagement in the entire climate regime. Right? It's not just limited to loss and damage. US has been the biggest blocker and has been obstructing negotiations for 30 years. Right from agreeing to the convention, the kind of role it played to water down the agreement, to leaving the Kyoto Protocol and then leaving, diluting the Kyoto Protocol and then leaving the Paris Agreement during Trump's regime. And Today, the reason we are facing climate crisis is because US never wanted to take up the responsibility based on its fair share. Now, that is the same reflection we are getting when it comes to negotiating the loss and damage fund. So US, first of all, did not want developed countries to be held accountable and responsible to provide money. And then when the agreement was being reached on developing countries being supported by the rich countries and they taking the lead, and also making it voluntary for anybody to contribute, be it large developing countries or corporations, philanthropies, anybody, because we know that need is massive. But even that particular language was not acceptable to the US. US wanted all contributions to be voluntary. Now imagine when you need hundreds of billions of dollars and when there is no system in terms of who is responsible to provide money and at what scale, how are we going to make that fund fit for purpose? So US basically wanted to dilute its responsibility, which we did not allow to happen.
That explains that why it took 27 COPs to not reach to any negotiation when it comes to pay, polluters should pay the principal. So, Harjeet bhai, in United Nations General Assembly session that happened in New York, you recommended kind of 4 thematic area in this loss and damage fund. Would you like to share those thematic areas and what is the significance of those 4 thematic areas for our viewers?
So basically, we argued that the fund should have 4 windows. One for the immediate response, so that when people are affected, we are not following the same process as Green Climate Fund, writing projects. Imagine if a country is affected by a disaster, how can they spend time writing a long proposal? Second one was to ensure that money is provided for rehabilitation and reconstruction for long-term recovery. Third was about slow onset events. So we know there are several disasters which are not conventional, like sea levels are rising, glaciers are melting, oceans are turning acidic, and there's a increasing pace of desertification. Those kind of disasters or impacts need a very different way of dealing with those. And these are also very long-term kind of impacts. And the fourth one was community direct access window. That's what, so that communities who would like to access money directly through their organization should be able to do that. So eventually what we got, so the language on community access is there, which means that now the new Loss and Damage Fund board is going to work on the details in terms of how communities can directly access. But there are no other windows. In fact, rich countries were pushing them to become sub-funds, and they wanted to link their contribution, which we also rejected, because the moment you start linking and contributors, we don't call them donors, contributors begin to define that they want to give money for this particular country or this particular reason, that's a non-starter. So we rejected that idea. But yeah, in spirit, all those 4 aspects are there. The details are going to be worked out next year.
So do you think that developing countries have their own mechanism or their way of working with those funds, how they are going to use those funds? Are they prepared? What do you think?
So a lot of money is going to go to ministries, finance ministry, and then they will use their standard system of responding to disasters. And we really don't want now a new or a parallel system to be established just for the reporting. And that has been a long fight explaining that, because countries to now create another channel, that is going to be quite time consuming. So that's why direct access principle was important. So what countries have to do is to make sure that they are covering the whole range of disasters and impacts, and they have strong transparency and accountability systems, at the same time involving communities in planning as well as implementation. So some of those things need to be ensured. We don't have to create a new system, and that is what going to help us activate this fund quickly, but also support communities on the ground.
So moving on to our last question, Do you think that this loss and damage fund negotiations happened so far, discussed so far, this framework and its operationalization? How do you see, what are your expectations at COP28? Do you think that developed country would agree to those terms and conditions? And what is the, if you have to rate like success of it at COP28, how do you see it?
Okay, so these are two related but distinct questions. Whether we are going to agree on the loss and damage fund operationalization and the draft document that is there, yes. I'm very hopeful because the resistance that US was showing not to agree because everybody else agreed is not there anymore. So which means that I'm hoping in the first week itself, it's going to be agreed. Is it good enough? No. Do we need to do more? Yes. Which means that, especially keeping an eye on the World Bank, that it meets all the conditions, because eventually we would like communities to have direct access and based on their needs and protecting their rights. Second, the document does not talk about scale. Now that is a big gap, which we need to address through other ways. For example, there is ongoing conversation on the global stock take, which is connected to loss and damage. If you don't mitigate, if you don't adapt, then you face more loss and damage. So that language needs to be there, which is also missing in the current decision. Then talk about if you don't, if look at the recent reports, temperatures are rising and we are not reducing the production of fossil fuels and not even talking about phasing out immediately and putting a plan forward, which means that loss and damage bill is going to increase. So we need to talk about, even the current needs are in the range of hundreds of billions of dollars. That has to be mentioned. And of course, making sure that the replenishment cycle is very clearly defined so that we are not begging and waiting for money. It's our right and it should happen through a system. So all those things can still be strengthened in the other areas of work. So the decision, what we call cover decision, that's going to come out from Dubai can actually mention that. So I'm hopeful that we are going to have some decision based on the document that we have, but we need to continue to make efforts to strengthen that so that it's the new loss and damage fund is fit for purpose.
Well, all eyes are at COP28 in Dubai starting by the end of this month is then, and let's hope and put our efforts by saying our mean like developing countries as a block, and we hope and pray that these will be translated into actions, and our trust would be gained by the developed world, because they have been, breaking our trust for years now. Thank you so much for for giving us time today, and we hope to talk to you at COP28 as well in Dubai, and see you here. Thank you so much for your time.
Look forward to seeing you, Maryam. Take care.